Hey guys, MBell556 here, and we're out at Bullet Creek for a field test. In today's video, we have 3 goals. Our first goal is to look at the 100-yard accuracy for this 140 grain VLD Berger from Silver State Armory. The second part of our test today is to look at another heavyweight 6.8 load. We're going to be looking at some rounds loaded by Iron Will Cartridge Company using the 130 grain gold dot projectile. Then the third part of the test is to look at some ballistics. We'll compare the Berger round at 140 grains with the 130 grain gold dot in the ballistics gel. For the first part of our test today, we're going to use the 140 grain Berger, and we're going to shoot at this type of target at 100 yards. I'll do 5 rounds for the headshot and 5 rounds for the center of mass. One of the other questions that has come up is whether this 140 grain Berger load from Silver State Armory is loaded with too high of a pressure. We were really surprised at the velocities we've got out of this short barrel. So today, another thing that we want to be careful and do is once we do our accuracy test, we're going to inspect the brass and make sure we do not have any signs of overpressure. Remember, we're using an aim point 2-minute of angle red dot sight. Once again, this is kind of a close quarters build. This isn't a target build, so we'll see what kind of groups we can get. There's just a little bit of smearing of the head stamp and a little bit of flattening of the primers. We don't have any blown primers or any real dangerous signs of overpressure. Here's the result. We had 5 headshots and 5 center of mass shots. So now what we'll do is let's investigate the 130 grain gold dot round and see what kind of velocities and what kind of accuracies we can get from that round, and then we'll take a look at both of those rounds in some ballistic gel. Okay, on to the second part of our test. Now we're going to look at the 130 grain gold dot loads. First, we're going to look at velocities with 3 different powders. We'll measure the velocities and find the fastest round. Then we'll pit the fastest 130 grain gold dot against the 140 grain VLD loads in both accuracy and in the ballistics gel. This is the accurate 2200 powder round. .2245, 2261, 2262. Now we're going to do the H335, 2177. This is what we found, and with the accurate 2200 powder, we had not only the fastest average in velocity, but you can see that there was only a variance of 17 feet per second between all 3 rounds. With the H335, we had the slowest velocity variance that was in the middle, and then with the Winchester 748, we had the second highest velocity. However, we had the greatest variance between rounds. So theoretically, it looks like the accurate 2200 powder comes out on top with both the highest muzzle velocity and the tightest velocity variance. So you would expect that this round would give us the best accuracy, and it also gives us the highest muzzle velocity. This is the contender for our heavyweight title. We're going to use the 130 grain gold dot with accurate 2200 powder, and we're going to compare the results of this round with the results of the Silver State Armory 140 grain VLD. Now we're going to look at the accuracy at 100 yards using the 130 grain Spear gold dot bullet loaded with accurate 2200 powder. Here's the results of the 130 grain Spear gold dot. This is the 5-shot group at the head. Once again, it's kind of very gusty conditions out here, so it's certainly not ideal, but there's the center of mass 5-shot group, and you can see actually a pretty tight group considering the conditions. So here's the setup for a ballistics gel test. We have our certified FBI block of ballistics gel. We backed it up with styrofoam. If we get over penetration, we've got 2 thick layers of styrofoam, a board, and then a center block. What I'm going to do first is shoot with the 130 grain Spear Gold Dot from Iron Will cartridge, and then we'll shoot with the 140 grain Silver State Armory VLD. Here's the result of the 130 grain Spear Gold Dot traveling at about 2,250 feet per second. It went through the 16 inches of ballistics gel, then it went through 3.5 inches of styrofoam, and then my backup 2x board stopped it, and you can see it's just right on the surface, and I'm going to dig this projectile out. It just kind of buried itself in the surface of the board. That certainly expanded and looks like it retained most of its weight. Mushroomed, fairly large. So we can see by about 2 inches the wound channel is really beginning to open up. You can actually see the spiraling of the petals with a very large permanent wound cavity from about 2 inches all the way to about 11 inches. And the bullet just exits. Once again, it's mushroomed out, but it's not traveling fast enough to cause any damage in the temporary wound cavity. But this is all expansion and damage of tissue, so very large permanent wound, but significant penetration. 16 inches of gel, 3.5 inches of styrofoam, and then stuck into a 2x10 board. So the 140 grain Berger is this closer, which looks like it's kind of on the bottom of these 2 tracks now. This closer wound track, much smaller, permanent wound track. It penetrated also the entire block, went through 3.5 inches of styrofoam, and stopped in our backup 2x10 board. Interestingly, look at the 140 grain Berger round in the board. It actually hit the board backwards, and it just comes right out. It just impaled itself backwards. We need to weigh this. It doesn't seem like 140 grains. Did some of the lead get squeezed out of this? And there's the tip. Absolutely did not open up at all. So the second tract, much more narrow tract from the 140 grain Berger all the way through. The guys at Iron Will Cartridge Company also loaded up just a few rounds with a 130 grain Nosler ballistic tip. And so since we're out here with this ballistic gel, let's go ahead and just see how this performs in the ballistic gel. We've had over penetration with both of our rounds, so let's give this a try while we're here, and then we'll go back to the shop, crunch some numbers, review some of the targets, and wrap it up. So this is the 130 grain Nosler ballistic tip totally different kind of wound channel now. You can see that it's dropping shrapnel. It goes in about the same distance before it starts to open up. You can see all three wounds now. First, second track, and then the third track. And then when it starts to open up, it starts dumping shrapnel. You can see fragments all along the permanent wound cavity. There's more fragments. And then it also over-penetrated. It went through, came out the gel. You can see though, one difference is in the styrofoam backing, there's some shrapnel that was dumped through the styrofoam as it was going through. And then it did go into our board. So here's the Nosler ballistic tip. It actually subjectively penetrated the deepest of all of them. We'll weigh these when we get back to the shop and kind of compare what we found. Well, we've had time to get back to the shop and analyze some of the information that we gathered out at Bullet Creek. Brett at Iron World Cartridge Company had loaded up the 130 grain Speer Gold Dot bullet using 3 different powders: the Accurate 2200, the Hodgdon 335, and the Winchester 748. He had also loaded up just a few test rounds using the Nosler ballistic tip 130 grain projectile. I was looking for the load that was going to give us the highest velocity and therefore the highest muzzle energy. The Accurate 2200 powder not only gave the fastest average velocity, but also had very little variance in the muzzle velocity between the rounds. So we figured that would probably give us the best accuracy as well. So with these results, picking out the fastest round, we were able to get back in the shop and run our ballistics calculator. You can see the results here. This fastest of the 130 grain Speer rounds yielded 1,469 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle, which is 342 pounds less than the VLD round. Now, the conditions were not ideal. I was on a wooden table. It was very windy and gusty that day, but it's real-world conditions, and I think the comparison is still valid. What we have on the right is our 140 grain VLD round. This is the grouping for the headshot, and then the 5-shot grouping for the center of mass shot right here, compared to the grouping that we got with the 130 grain Speer Gold Dot load. Our first shot is this track right here, and that is the track for the 130 grain Speer, and even though it was traveling slower and has less energy, it had a massive permanent injury cavity. The second shot was our heavier 140 grain Berger, and you can see it stays thin where it looks like it's opening just a little bit. This lighter colored area right here, it appears that what's happening is the bullet started to yaw and turn sideways and actually exited rearward. And so the tract itself is much smaller. And then our third shot was just the shot we wanted to try, this Nosler ballistic tip. And here we saw instant fragmentation. You have fragments here. You see scattering fragments coming out with the edge of the wound cavity. Little fragment here, fragment there, and then it exited. So all 3 rounds exited our FBI 16-inch block of ballistic gelatin. Now looking at the end of the gel block also tells the story. Once again, this was our Speer Gold Dot round, and the entrance, you can see that the permanent wound channel is circumferential throughout the tract and was the largest of all 3. Our Berger 140 grain entered here, and you can see that the wound channel is actually a slice along this way, and there again, if you look closely from the side, it appears that the bullet just started to spin around and was actually traveling broadside, where you see this injury here. And then the Nosler ballistic tip had a nice wound channel with fragmentation that we didn't see in the 130 grain Speer Gold Dot. Here we have all three of the rounds recovered. The Speer Gold Dot on the right, 140 grain Berger in the middle, and the Nosler ballistic tip on the left. Gold Dot performed the best both in looking at the wound channel in the ballistics gel and also just looking at the round itself. It mushroomed very nicely. We weighed this, and actually it weighs 127 grains, so it retained 97% of its weight. And if you look at what we got here, you know, about a half an inch, a little bit more maybe. So really that kind of accounts for the wound channel that we saw. So it mushroomed to about a 50 caliber. Now this is where I was so shocked and really so disappointed. The 140 grain Berger that delivered so much energy out of the muscle, when it hits the ballistic gelatin, it look at the hollow point, still completely intact. This round yawed. It dumped a bunch of lead out of the back. We weighed this, and in fact this 140 grain round went down to 103 grains. So it's retained 74% of its weight, and obviously there was no expansion there at all. This ballistic tip from Nosler did mushroom, and just to look at the expansion again, just kind of roughly 0.43. Looks like about the biggest. It's approaching, if you take these outer edges, it's approaching ½ inch. So good mushrooming, good expansion. This round, however, dumped a lot of its weight as it was traveling through the tissue, and the final weight of the Nosler ballistic tip was 97.6 grains, so it retained 75%. So these two rounds lost about 25% of their original weight, and the Gold Dot kept almost all of its original weight. So I'm very impressed and very surprised. So what did I learn? Well, first impressions can be misleading. All that glitters isn't gold. In medicine, we always say, treat the patient, not the numbers. And I really was surprised at what we found here. The round that had such a high muzzle energy, I would have thought just that's got to be the best self-defense round. It's going to deliver the most energy and have the most wounding and be the best round for protecting yourself. But we were very surprised. The 130 grain Speer Gold Dot bullet performed very well. I personally liked the load with a little bit faster velocity using the accurate 2200 powder. Another thing to consider is the Silver State Armory 115 grain open tip match was delivering the best accuracy when we did our initial testing with this particular firearm. What I'd like to do now, I think, is do some follow-up with the ballistics gel and that 115 grain round as well. I think the point of this is just don't look at numbers and make decisions based on that. I was also surprised because this 140 grain Berger round is designed to fly very well, and the gusty winds should not have affected that as much as the other rounds. However, the accuracy wasn't nearly what I would expect or want in a self-defense firearm. I hope you found the information useful and interesting. If you did, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.